There is a version of this conversation that begins with concern, with the language of intervention, of social deficiency, of something gone wrong in a person who prefers the interior of a room to the performance of belonging. That version is not this one. What actually happens to a mind that spends years inside sustained solitude is not deterioration. It is not pathology. It is something closer to a forced upgrade that no one designed, no one announced, and almost no one explains clearly, because most of the people who could explain it have stopped attending the kind of gatherings where explanations get passed around. Your brain did not break. It adapted. And the adaptation runs deeper than most people who have never experienced extended aloneness can recognize, because from the outside it looks like withdrawal, and from the inside it feels like clarity. Both of those readings are incomplete. The truth is more structural than either one. The first thing that changes is the texture of silence. Not immediately, not in the first months, when silence still carries the residue of noise, the ghosts of conversations, the low hum of social obligation, the background frequency of other people's expectations. But after time, something shifts. Silence stops functioning as the absence of sound and begins functioning as a medium, a substance with its own weight and grain. The mind, no longer competing for its own attention, learns to move differently inside that substance. It learns to hold a single thread of thought for hours without interruption, to follow an idea past the point where most people let go because someone refilled a glass or changed the subject. This is not a personality trait. It is a trained neurological capacity developed by an environment that stopped interrupting. The cost of that capacity is rarely discussed, and it is real. The nervous system, once calibrated to that level of quiet, begins to read ordinary social noise as disproportionate, not socially, physiologically. Small talk stops being dull and starts being draining in a way that carries a specific texture, like a sound frequency that does not hurt exactly, but interferes. People interpret this as arrogance or coldness, or the visible edge of something antisocial. What it actually is a sensory threshold that moved. The loner did not become contemptuous of other people. Their system recalibrated to a baseline that most social environments will never match. This is not superiority, it is misalignment. And misalignment has a cost, whether you understand its source or not. The second transformation is in the mechanism of thought itself, and this one carries both the clearest advantage and the sharpest hidden risk. A mind that stops being regularly interrupted by external validation begins to generate ideas without waiting for permission. It stops checking the room before concluding. It stops editing in real time for social reception. The result is a kind of cognitive independence that functions as a genuine asset in any field that rewards original analysis, because the thoughts arrive without the contamination of what the group already believes, without the soft censorship of consensus, without the subtle bend that happens when people think in the presence of judgment. Independent thought is not a moral achievement. It is a structural outcome of an environment that removed the mirror. But the mirror also served a function that most people only notice once it is gone. A conversation, even a shallow one, creates interruption. And interruption, as counterintuitive as this reads, is one of the primary mechanisms by which a thought is prevented from eating itself. Without an external point of contact, the mind can enter a closed loop. A concern becomes a theory becomes a certainty becomes a wall. The ruminative loop is not a character flaw, and it is not weakness. It is what happens when a sharp instrument has no external surface to orient against. The thought becomes both the blade and the material it is cutting, and eventually those two functions become indistinguishable. The solution is not more social contact, it is direction. A mind without a project is not a resting mind. It is an engine running without load, and engines in that state do not idle peacefully. They overheat. The third shift is social, but it is not about preferences. It is about value calibration. The person who has lived for years inside genuine solitude does not become antisocial. They become precise. They develop, without choosing to, an extremely high internal reference point for what peace actually feels like. And when that reference point is high enough, ordinary social interaction does not simply feel neutral by comparison. It feels like a net negative. Not because people are unpleasant, but because the baseline the system is comparing against is silence, depth, and internal coherence. And most conversation cannot compete with that baseline on its own terms. This is where the misread happens. The loner is not rejecting people. They are rejecting a specific type of expenditure that no longer balances. What they are searching for, even when they cannot name it, is contact that operates at the same density as their interior world. Allies, not audience. Precision, not volume. The strategy is not to force tolerance for low-value interaction. The strategy is to stop treating quantity of contact as equivalent to quality of connection, and to build deliberately toward the few relationships that can hold the same level of weight that the mind now carries by default. The fourth transformation is perhaps the most disorienting and the most underestimated. Years of solitude eliminate something that most people rely on so completely that they never notice it operates at all: the social mirror. The habit of understanding yourself by watching how others respond to you, of knowing who you are in part because of the reflection that comes back from the room. The loner loses that mirror gradually, and in its place develops something that looks like confidence but functions differently. It is not confidence in the sense of certainty about outcomes. It is identity without external confirmation, a sense of self that no longer requires the room to agree in order to remain stable. The gain is real. The character becomes harder to move by pressure, harder to destabilize by opinion, harder to bend by the slow social mechanics that reshape most people without their knowledge or consent. But the same rigidity that protects also resists. Feedback that is genuinely useful begins to arrive with the same weight as feedback that is merely conventional, and the system that filters external input, the same system that preserved the identity, now struggles to distinguish between the two. The wall that kept the noise out keeps some signal out as well. This is the compound cost, and it is the one that accumulates silently, not in dramatic collapse, in drift. The days begin to lose their edges. Without social markers, shared events, external schedules, the rhythm that other people impose on time simply by existing, time becomes something the loner controls entirely. And total control over time is not the freedom it appears to be. It is a territory without landmarks. Days that were meant to be monuments become indistinguishable from days that were meant to be rest. Motivation does not disappear suddenly. It erodes the way stone erodes, without announcing each layer that is lost, until one morning the shape is noticeably different, and it is not clear when that happened. The warning in this title was never about danger. It was about precision. The mind that has lived for years in sustained solitude has been operating in an extreme environment, and extreme environments produce adaptations that require maintenance that is specific to what they produced. The answer is not to abandon solitude. The answer is to stop treating the adaptations as though they require no management. Structure is not the enemy of freedom in this context. It is the infrastructure that prevents drift from becoming erosion. Routine, not because someone said so, but because the mind that runs without external load needs a self-imposed architecture to remain oriented. And contact, not abundant contact, not performative contact, but 2 or 3 or 5 people who can hold weight, who operate at density, who function as the external surface the thought can orient against without losing its edge in the process. The loner's mind, after years of genuine solitude, is not a broken system. It is a system that was built for a specific environment and is now responsible for maintaining the conditions that environment no longer provides automatically. That is a different problem than deficiency. It requires a different kind of solution, and it begins with understanding the mechanism clearly enough to stop misreading the adaptation as the damage.